All right, back for another episode. Actually, episode number 95. 95. I am slowly creeping towards that 100th episode. Haven't planned the 100th episode, but I've got some things in mind about maybe getting a reunion of some folks back on who have been on in the past. So you don't want to keep listening. And I have to say that this episode today, we've been trying to make this happen for, I don't know, it's been at least 6 months, just due to all kinds of things. And you all know that I kind of quit recording there for a while, and just had to take a break, and the break was a necessity. And now I'm back, and I told tonight's guest, Kris, I said, listen, I may make a mistake because I'm a little rusty in this again, but hey, here I am. So, and I have something super exciting to let you all know about. This has just happened in the last couple weeks, and I think I'm going to tell the story. I think I'm going to tell the story of how it all came about. I was debating, but I think I'm going to. So just a few weeks ago, actually it's been longer than a few weeks ago. I realized that I have just been trying to figure out exactly what I want to do. And I had a lot of internal debate, and I have to admit I've missed being back in schools and around educators and adults all the time. Now, of course, I'm still supporting a lot of schools and districts across the country, but I mean regularly. I mean relationships. And shout out to my Chester County folks in Pennsylvania. Real, true, authentic relationships. We text all the time. We've been working together 2 years, and I'm going to keep working with them. But I had this internal debate and what I wanted to do. And I texted a friend, colleague, mentor of mine, said, listen, I'm having this debate. I'm wondering if this is something, if I'm ready to go back. It just feels like I'm ready to go back into the schools full time here locally. And there's a lot of educational issues happening in our state of Tennessee. And you can look that, just Google it and you'll see all the things. And so I've been really pulled to be a part of the solution and just stop talking about this problem. And so I texted a buddy. He's like, hey, reach out to the district and see what they say. And I said, I will. And they said, let's meet next week. And so I happen to be sitting in the parking lot of my son's school, dropping him off in the mornings, which I've done every day. And I've really enjoyed that. And so after I get this sense of ease, like this is what I need to do, I pull out of the parking lot of the school. I take a ride. I live in Middle Tennessee. And I'm driving about 5 minutes into my 8-minute drive home. In front of my car, you all, this is I couldn't even make this up if I had to, flies a bald eagle in front of my car. And when I say a massive one, I've lived in Middle Tennessee for now almost 20 years. I see them by the lake. I see them when we go to rural parts of the state, but I've never seen one by my home. It flew in front of me and it took off. It was the most unbelievable experience. I called my wife, said, you're not going to believe this. And so I looked it up, and it said, if this happens to you, right, it means you're ready to move forward and take the next step of whatever you feel is the right thing to do. That was it. That was it, you all. And I got a fortune cookie that also told me that I'm going to get an opportunity where I will be overly blessed. And so I'm not superstitious. I'm just going to be honest and tell you. But I don't deny some pretty powerful things that the universe shows us in the variety of ways. So I'm going back to be a non-evaluative principal, coach, and mentor. I just get to be support, you all, like real, true support. I don't manage anyone. It really is. I'm showing up to schools. I'm just there to be a support. What do you need? You need somebody in the cafeteria? I got you for a while, right? Hey, do you need a minute? Let me talk, and let me jump in here real quick and let me help you out. You need somebody in the office? I'll come up and answer a phone, right? All those things as principals, we've really needed support, and I get to do that. So huge announcement on that one, you all. I'm still going to be doing my keynotes. I'm still going to be doing some consulting for sure, but I'm jumping back in. I felt the need. So enough about that. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the conference and all that stuff, because I don't want to take too much time, because we have an amazing guest. I've known Kris for several years at this point now. And we worked really hard and diligently to get this next guest. And Kris Jenkins has taught our youngest and most vulnerable learners for almost over 40 years in education. A heart-wrenching trauma early in her young life led to a lifetime of ripples in giving back to other children and their families. Kris wholeheartedly believes that children must feel loved, nurtured, safe, supported before true learning occurs. I agree 100%. And I also, Kris, say adults have to feel that too. In addition to being a full-day preschool teacher, Kris is a published author and a family engagement coordinator for her elementary school. So, Kris, welcome finally to the podcast.
Thank you.
More about the Kris story.
Well, I grew up on a farm. Well, it started with I was an Air Force brat for a hot minute. And when I was 7, my dad was in his airplane crashed in Vietnam. And thinking back, I can really I don't know the word I want. I can really attribute everything I believe to how I teach and why I teach the way I do to that one singular moment in time. I had an amazing second grade teacher who did everything in her power to help me out of that traumatic experience, and would meet my mom at the door every day and let me come in and sharpen pencils or pass out papers or that kind of thing. Um, and it really truly could have ended there, but it didn't. We stayed in touch with her, and she stayed in touch with us. And then even through high school and college, she stayed in touch with us, and I ended up going to college in the same town where she lived, and I would go to her house and we'd talk teacher stuff, or if I didn't go home for the weekend, I was invited there for Sunday dinner. And so that whole family engagement piece was solidified pretty young in my life. Um, and then I had teachers growing up too. My mom and my aunt were both teachers. My uncle was president of the school board in this little dinky town in northeast Nebraska. And so the teachers always came to our house after football games and basketball games, and they went snow skiing with us every spring break. So teachers were just a part of our lives. They just really were. And that was basically imprinted in my heart and in my soul. Um, when I broke up with a high school boyfriend, my high school English teacher drove out to the farm to see if I was okay. Just those kind of really caring relationships. So that's just been who I am and what I believe that teaching should be. You should really, it's just ingrained in my DNA, I guess.
Right. I mean, it's being human, right? I mean,
Right.
Being an educator is just, first of all, being human. And I think that's something that we have to continue to get back to. And, people are like, oh, well, that was back then. That was in the rural, no, it doesn't have to be in any certain stereotype of like, oh, well, that only happens there. That isn't true. I'm going to be honest. I went to students' basketball games. I had a parent call me. There was a major family crisis. I went to the house, right? We've gotten this idea that things are so changed, we can't do anything that we used to do. And I push back and say, we need to change a lot of what we used to do, but there's so much that we can continue to do. And that's what I hear you saying, right? Like,
right. And it's that whole Maslow before Bloom.
Absolutely.
You have to meet their basic physiological needs before they can ever learn. I mean, I give my families, well, now I do a Google Voice.
Yes.
And when I was teaching, not here in Topeka, but in a different town. I mean, I with the caveat that between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., I don't answer my phone. It's on
Good idea.
silent. Yeah, and that the parents know that. And so when I was teaching in a different town, I mean, I got up the next morning and there was a voicemail from a family who the mom was a single mom and the son who was in my kindergarten class lived with grandma, and grandma was life flighted to Wichita.
Mm.
I need to know that. And then I got to school the next morning. I went into the cafeteria and I got him because he was eating, well, he was trying to eat breakfast in there, but he was a hot mess. And I brought him into my classroom with his breakfast and let him eat and talk to him. And we called mom, and mom, grandma's okay. Grandma's doing fine. And he got to talk to mom, and it settled him down. And so he could finish his breakfast and be a little bit calmer before he started his learning day.
Sometimes, Chris, we make this work so much more complicated than it needs
Right.
to be, right? And I think
Yes.
that it really does come down to that, like just showing up, right? But we also have to dig into a lot, and it's why we write books, right? You've written a book. I'm in the midst of writing a book. It's why
I
we
brought
want
it.
resources. Of course you did. So tell us a little bit about teamwork makes the dream work. And I know, and you dedicated it to the teacher that you talked about earlier. But tell us a little bit about. Well, first of all, the
Yes.
title. I think we've all heard, right, many times in the use in all kinds of meetings. But why that title, one, and then tell us a little bit about what you put in the book and what you wrote about.
It's a real short read. I think it's only like 80 pages long. It was actually my husband's idea. It was my therapy during COVID because I was a hot mess, not being with my kids. It was horrible. And he said, "Why don't you write down all the things that you do for your kids before school starts, during the school year, and even after the kids leave your classroom?" Because I have kids now that are sending me birth announcements and wedding announcements, and after being in the business 40 years, um, my kids, some of my first students are old, and I just started writing, and I was turned down a couple times, and then I found somebody who would publish it. But it's yeah, I broke it down into segments about things to do before school starts to start building family relationships. Um, and then in the middle, things that you can do while the kids are in your classroom um, to engage families. And then at the end, once you've built those relationships, it's not just, cold turkey, cut them off, bye, see ya. You need to keep some of those relationships going. And then special segment for during COVID. How do you keep family relationships going during COVID when you can't see them? And what the things that we did as a preschool team in South Central Kansas at the time that kept our family relationships going. And the funniest one and the most rewarding one was we just got a wild hair to do a Zoom sing along. And we
Love it.
ended up doing 3 different segments because of when families were available. The funniest, cutest thing ever is these little preschoolers on Zoom, and you have the 1 hour on free Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
and just having it because it didn't dawn on us that they hadn't seen each other either. We didn't really think about that. We thought, oh, it should be fun to get together and sing some of our old preschool songs. But just to sit back and listen to them see each other and talk to each other because they hadn't seen each other for so
Mm-hmm.
long. And it was just beautiful, and our assistant principal was on one of them, and she's texting me while they're singing and talking, and she goes, "This is hilarious." And, I mean, it was so rewarding, and we did, during COVID, we did daily no, weekly check-ins, and if they didn't check in, the school resource officer and principal went to check in on them and make sure they were okay and if their families had any needs. We did porch visits where we sat on their front porch and read them a story just so we could put eyes on them and make sure that everybody was okay. And I think the families needed that, but I think that we as the teachers needed that too. We needed that time to make sure they were okay. So,
Yeah, and
and that's where the book came from.
yeah, and tell us a little bit about. You just gave us some tidbits of things before, or you actually gave more during school and even during the pandemic. And let's hope we don't have to deal with another pandemic. But you know what? Who knows? And if we do, we're ready, more ready than we were the first one, right? I mean, I guess we have some schema at this point, but tell us a little bit about before school and then tell us a little bit about in the middle of school. And you know, we just were many schools are just coming back from a break. And I truly believe that when we come back from a long break, and here in Tennessee, we were back for a week and a half. And then we've been out now tomorrow. My son's district just announced they're going to be out again tomorrow. We haven't been to school since the Friday before Martin Luther King Day. So it's been significant, right? So when kids come back,
yeah, it's
a good time to think about how do we re-engage in our families and how do we re-engage students if they've been gone for a significant amount of time. So what are some thoughts?
Well, one of the things that we did before school started and was this was when I was in South Central Kansas, and it was easier because the school was smaller. You know, in Topeka, it's more difficult, and we're working on ways to engage families like cookouts or those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
But we just got a wild hair, my co-teacher and I, to just say, hey, Miss Jen and I are going to be in the park and we're going to have popsicles. Come over if you can. And this was before school started. And we thought, this will be a great way for us to see if we got some behavior problems going on or, how they get along with each other because they all live in the same town. And, are we going to have to split some kids up and how are we going to do that and give us some good information? What we didn't realize is how great it was for the families. Because then they had met families that they were like, oh, I met you. Yeah, we can have play dates. Yeah, that'll be great. Had no clue. And then this was the pandemic year too. And so we started having monthly family engagement days where we combined our two classes. My room was the old band room, so it was huge. Was great. And we invited all families in to do STEM and STEAM activities with their kids for 2 hours once a month. And it was so much fun to watch families interact with their kids. There was a dad who didn't know this, on his way to prison, didn't know it, but he said to me before he was sent to prison, thank you for not treating me like a convict. And I'm in my head, I'm like, huh? I didn't even know. But he was a great dad. Wrong place, wrong time, bad choices. But he was there. He was with his kids. I mean, he's out now. Who am I to judge? We all make
True that. And for the record, I've been to jail, just so you know. And I tell people all the time, I don't judge because I've been there. And I say that because a lot of times people don't realize that we're engaging with real humans. I'm a real human. I'm very open about my past. I have a very riddled past. And people treated me differently then. And sometimes when I tell them, oh, I've been arrested, I've been to county jail, I've done things that I shouldn't have done. And I wouldn't change any of it because that's who I am, right? But people now professionally, they're like, I can't believe you talk about that. Well, why wouldn't I? I mean, we're all human. And again, it comes down to that human piece. And it makes me think of something that we did that I would love to share with the listeners about family engagement and authenticity and building trust and connections and all of that. We did something called the Family Supper. And I think I probably talked about it on this podcast
Yes.
before. But what it is basically we just invited the families in. We all ate together. And I must say, eating together is a really powerful thing, right? Like no expectations. We just set at tables with families and just ate, right? Then we took the students and we did something with them, an activity. We had a whole team that did whatever. And then the parents actually, we went into the gym or the cafeteria, depending on how many, and we had a circle, and it was a family circle. And we would ask questions like, "What are your hopes and dreams for your child?" And I started it, and I only talked about my own child. I didn't talk about everybody else's child, because guess what? I want the same for them too. And I would tell them, I'm talking about my own child, but you might as well just go ahead and include all the students here, because what I want for my child is what I want for your children. And parents went around and began to share. And what we learned is we all have hopes and dreams for our kids. What I saw was parents began to cry. Parents began to be connected. Parents who didn't speak English, we had translators for, and they could have their voice heard, right? It was these authentic engagement pieces that we didn't ask for anything. We just wanted you to show up. And if you didn't want to share, you didn't have to. If you didn't want to sit in the circle, you didn't have to. And what we learned is that brought community into our school, right? Because everybody was seen, heard, and validated. And not to mention, we had a family resource center, which was a center families could come. There were diapers, there was food, there was clothes, there was volunteer opportunities. We had all these things, right? Because it's not my school, right? As the principal, it wasn't my school. It wasn't the teacher's school. And I've said this 1,000 times, schools aren't built so people can have jobs. That isn't the reason we have schools, right? It isn't. It's not for me to have a job, right? It's so we can be a support for the community, both through education and building community within the school, right? We are a part of the community. We're not coming into the community. We are part. And so having those resources were a really powerful piece too. And then, Kris, I want to go back really quick.
Okay.
Because I've learned something about you, and I just had an experience in the last month that has changed a lot for me. When you say you lost your dad in Vietnam, I lost my dad, but he was still here. And I say I lost I'm not gonna have precipitation. I'm gonna try not to. I never knew my dad before war until after this holiday break. I was going through his house. He's since been remarried. My mom passed away 3 or 4 years ago, and helping them go through some things. And I found a treasure trove of documentation from when my dad was in Vietnam. And it was all of the telegrams that the military sent my mom. It was all the letters between my mom and dad, between my dad and my grandparents. Mm-hmm. And you know, Kris, I got to get a true picture into my dad of who he was before he was in war. And it's not somebody I've ever known. I've only known my dad post-Vietnam, post-complex PTSD, post all these things. And the healing that I got, that I needed as a son, was powerful. And him and I have had different conversations. He's going to record his story, which he's never done before. He's only told it twice. And one time that I heard, I was in high school, and he actually broke a podium because of so much pent up trauma that he had in his body. So I want to tell you that you saying that built a connection with me, because that experience over the winter break has changed my life. Being able to read all of his story. And we forget sometimes we are part of those stories. And when you shared your part of your dad's story, and you have people that came in when he was gone, really reinforced to me how important that our role is as an educator, right? You talked about your teacher, as principals, as family engagement specialists, all of these, you all, because guess what? Our kids are bringing all of the same experiences with them into our classrooms. So let's go back, Kris, because you've been in education for 40 years. 40 years. You've seen in 40 years. I was sitting there thinking 40 years. Now, I've been in education 20 years, and I'm like, no, actually 16. I don't want to lie. I was like, 16 years. I've seen a lot. So let's talk about some of those things that you've seen over the last 40 years. And I want to go back to the one thing you said before we started on the podcast. My teacher was doing this before it had a name. So
Right.
talk about some of the things you've seen, but talk about that as well, because I think it's really important that we don't get caught up in the jargon, we get caught up in the stuff and forget about the work. So tell us a little bit more about what you've seen in your experience, even before this had a name.
So, when I think back to Mrs. Moore in second grade, the things that she did to help me get reacclimated, um, made a huge impact. And the first time I heard our friend Jim's four-letter talk, I was like, I mean, the waterworks just started. And I was just like, he just gave a name to everything I believe that teaching should be about. You need to be human with these babies who may not have anyone being human to them um, before they get to your classroom. You know, um, Things that I've seen. Oh my gosh. Um, I had a little boy, um, not going to say where I was teaching, but had a toothache. And Um, I looked and I said, "Go get a drink." I just thought, like a molar was coming in or something. I said, "Go get a drink of water." He just started sobbing. Let me look in your mouth. He look in his mouth. His tooth is half rotten out. And um, so I took him to the nurse, and they called home, and he said, "Well, my dad gives me medicine." I said, "Does he?" And, he said, "Yeah," and I said, "Well, does it taste like orange? Does it taste li is it pink medicine?" I'm going through all this stuff, and he's talking, he goes, "No, it's brown medicine, and it's yucky." And so I'm sitting in the office with the secretary, and I asked the secretary, I said, "Pull up a picture of Jack Daniels." And she pulls up a picture of Jack Daniels. "Yeah, that's the stuff." And he goes, "Yeah, he gives it to me, and I sleep, and my tooth don't hurt no more." And I'm just like, "Oh my god." Um, I've been on home visits where the mom was making a drug deal while I sat in their kitchen. You know, um, one of my success stories is a kid that was in my classroom who was a hot mess. He is just he was one of those kids that was redshirted, so he would be bigger for sports, and he had a lot going on. His parents had divorced. Um, they were both teachers, and he mom had remarried, dad was living with someone, um, biggest kid in the class, um, but he just could not. He would tip over tables, he'd trash my room, he'd dive under desks. Um, And we worked his mom and I worked really hard together. I mean, the minute he would start acting up, she'd come get him, take him to his, child psychologist, and he'd be back. She was very on it. Well, come to find out he had a functional vision issue. So, and that's very hard to diagnose. So every time he would look down and then look up at the board while I was writing, he'd lose it in transition. So he lost a whole year of learning basically because of his behavior and because of the functional vision. So I tutored him over the summer. And then my building got sold, and because his mom was a teacher, he could go to whatever building he wanted to, and he wanted to go with Mama Mrs. Jenkins, my other mom. So he was at that school, and I would walk in, and he was at before school care, and he could either come to my room, and I'd look at his work, and he'd play on the computer if he was having that kind of a morning, or he would stay down and play. And I was his safe spot. If he started feeling escalated, he'd leave his classroom, come hang out in my preschool room. Well, He's graduated. He just turned 22. He's graduated. And I went to his graduation and he didn't know I was coming. His mom and I kept it a secret from him.
Mm,
I pulled up in their driveway and I rolled down, he was telling people where to park. And I rolled down my window and he just started sobbing. He goes, I can't believe you came. I said, where else would I be? Dude,
mhm,
you're my second son. Where else would I be? And
mhm.
then I was talking to my other friends that, I taught with, and he just every once in a while come over and put his arm around me and go, I can't believe you came. And yeah,
And,
I
and
mean,
that, I mean, and those are the important things, right? And I think about too when I was in school. Gosh, and it's been, I graduated in 1995, so it's been a couple years ago. I was of the era where there was a paddle on the principal's wall, right? And it was referred
yeah,
to as the Board of Discipline. And
right.
um, I wasn't the type of kid that was afraid of getting in trouble. To be quite honest, I just didn't care um, because I had been convinced that I was going to be a problem. I had a theory that if once I was a freshman in high school, if I just caused a ruckus, the freshmen, by the time I was a senior, that's just what they would expect. And I was spot on. And by the way, I only had to go a half day when I was a senior because it wasn't an academic issue, right? And I think about these conversations that are happening now with what we're doing for kids and this pushback we're getting. And I know you're in Kansas, and it looks differently than what it looks like here in Tennessee, but Tennessee, we can still paddle in the state of Tennessee. It's still not outlawed. It's not used very often. Thank goodness, but it's not used at all in Metro Nashville Public Schools. They banned that for many, many years ago. But we think about these progressions of things that we've learned over time. And, even in the book that I'm co-authoring, that'll be out, I don't know, whenever it comes out, we're talking about stress and how it impacts not only children, but adults. And I constantly am saying, this push of that I hear often in my local politics is, well, we need to do it how when we were in school, and we were in school this, we were in school that. And here's what I constantly say: we're not in the same environment that when we were in school. I never did an active shooter drill when I was in school. I never
No,
worried about somebody coming in, kicking a door down, firing through, and hurting me. That didn't happen, right? I
right.
might have been afraid of certain student um, bullying me and maybe beating me up, maybe. Although I was really little, but I still never feared that. I don't know why. Maybe I should have. Um, and we go back to like think about it. They didn't have social media, right? We didn't
Right.
have we didn't have a pandemic. We didn't have any of these things that used to be. But yet we still want to do things in so many places and spaces like we used to do it.
The
And
way
that
it's always
also,
been done.
that's right, Kris. And here's the other thing. We want teachers to operate as they always have. Which let me reinforce that a little bit. We want teachers to pour all of themselves all day, every day in isolation without support and say, just you knew what you signed up for. That's your job. Here's what I want to say. That's shifting too, right? Teachers now, we can't. It's just not physically, emotionally possible to be in isolation in your
Right.
classroom doing your thing and do it without having impact, right? So I want to go back to your book a little bit where we have this title of the teamwork makes the dream work. And I believe teamwork is the only way the work is ever going to actually get done. So
Yes.
what are your thoughts
And
around now, especially with why this book is so important and how educators need this idea?
I tell my parents when we do home visits at the beginning of the year. And I tell my parents at the beginning of the year, you know your child better than I'm ever going to know them in a school year. And I need your wisdom and your expertise to know how to best serve your child and your family to help them be the best learner they can be. And one of the things, well, to go back to when I was in South Central Kansas, my building principal has given me permission to bring back the um, to bring back the monthly family engagement. So we have late start on Fridays so that we can have our building professional development or our building staff meetings, that kind of stuff. And so one Friday a month is Family Engagement Friday. And it has been the most fun having those families come in and be with their kids and watch them interact with their kids. And then I got a wild hair. My para said, "Why don't you write a grant so you're not paying for that out of pocket?" So I did, and I was awarded the grant. So I'm not paying for it all out of pocket. And in December, some of the members of the, I'm going to say it wrong, but the Topeka Public Schools Education Foundation came in and did family engagement with my kids. So they could see it too. And it has been so much fun and so rewarding, and the parents love it. And when's the next one? And what are we going to do? I'm not telling you what we're doing. You have to show up to know what we're going to do. And I had a dad show up last week. We only had 8 kids show up because the weather was so crummy. But he showed up for the first time because he's Hispanic, and he was off because he works construction. So mom was working. She sent him in. He goes, "Why did I not know about this before?" in his broken English. And I said, "One Friday a month, buddy, one Friday a month, just for the morning between breakfast and PE and music, one Friday a month." And it's just been the most fun.
And I think part of, sorry, Kris, there was a slight delay. Sorry about that.
It brings the families in. They get to see what we're doing. The kids love it. I mean, we have tiers, still have tiers, even though it's January when they split, but it was like, they're fine. They're doing this for your benefit. They'll be fine. We'll get them to PE and music. And I'm so glad that we were afforded the opportunity to do this with our families.
Well, and I also want to go in and go a little further, even say sometimes engagement is just saying, what barriers do you see that we could do better? How could we make your experience as a parent better, right? We used to survey the parents all the time. What prevents you from being able to get your students here on time? A lot of it was a train in the neighborhood. No joke, a train. We all knew it. It was the dreadful train. So I talked to the county councilman, was like, "Can we do something about when it runs? And can there be a pause for like 20 minutes? And so I think sometimes it's just conversational too. We don't need them to come in to do anything other than to talk to us. Let us know what's up. I can tell you that so many parents have had terrible experiences with schools when they were students, that they have a perception of what schools are based on what their experience was. One. And two, I'm constantly pushing back on this idea of we don't know what kids are dealing with at home. And sometimes we're the only caring, loving adult. Sometimes we're not. Sometimes schools are not the safe haven, right? And if we're going to really get to the depth of this work, we have to be open and honest about what's happening in our schools with our parents. I've had some really, really tough experiences with parents. And guess what? They've had some tough experiences with me. They've seen me not at my best. They've seen me reactive. They've saw me when I wasn't the most calm as I could be, right? So I think sometimes we feel like we have to keep parents busy when really sometimes we just need a conversation. Tell us what's going to make this school better for you. How do we make this better for you? And once parents are seen, heard, and validated, the same thing you said that you believe kids do, then engagement increases, right? Boom. Right. Because they're a part of it. It's not you're doing it. And I talk about this all the time. I talk to parents as a parent. I very rarely ever talk to them as a principal, and I would tell them, I have to talk to you as a principal right now, but mostly I'm just talking to you as a parent. I have a 13-year-old. He just turned 13 in December. Y'all, I don't have it figured out. Like, he doesn't, thank goodness he doesn't get in trouble at school. He takes after his mother, thank goodness, right? But if he did, I'd be like, he at home now, it's a whole different world. He is his authentic self all day, every day, which he should be, right? But I struggle as a parent sometimes. So sometimes those connections can look like authenticity. Listen, I am a parent first, and then I'm a principal. And sometimes I fail as a parent. I've said that to parents before, and they're like, and I've had every class known to man about what you should do for kids. And sometimes I mess up with my own kid. So sometimes that engagement just looks like
Sure.
authentic conversations. And I challenge everybody to listen to the podcast here with Mustafa Muhammad. He was a parent at Fall Hamilton. He was one of the parents at school who I've grown to become friends with. I text him every month. We text constantly back and forth. He was a parent. I remember him coming in and sharing his wisdom with me as a principal, watching his engagement with his own children. I was in awe. The love he exuded with yet that idea of I'm trying to keep you from doing what I've done, because he had a riddled past, which is why we connected. He was in a gang. He had been to prison. He can't vote anymore. There's all kinds of things that he had, but he had a love for his kid the same that I do. And I had to watch him interact as a parent and learn. So I think sometimes too, our parents have so much for us to learn, and not just we have to teach.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I mean, we have 3 kids, and I can remember, going to their conferences and having the teachers say, "Why are you here?" Well, because I want to hear how my kids are doing. Well, they're angels. What are we talking about? The same children? Because, and so much has been written about how when kids are at school, they work so hard, and at home is where they can be their authentic selves and let their hair down and their stresses and all of. I can remember my daughter coming home from having and she's the even keel one of the 3, having a really crummy day at school and throwing her backpack, and I'm not going to swim practice, and I'm like, "Oh, but you are." And she'd come home from swim practice giggling and laughing. Well, who are you? And it's those exercise endorphins that you talk about. And I can remember substitute. I had to switch to be in my son's class one day just to cover his class. He came home with a migraine, and his friends were all who practically lived at our house were, "Hey, Kris, hey, Kris." And he was working so hard to be good so he wouldn't get in trouble. And I just said, I can't go in and cover his class anymore because that's not fair to him. He can't be his true self at school if I'm in the room, because he he will, it's not good for his health. He'll get, a migraine. So, they try so hard at school. So at home, they need to be themselves. And so when I have parents that say, "My kid is such a hellion," well, you need to let them be. Let them be, because they worked so hard at school. And, when we talk about homework, they don't have homework. My kids don't have homework. You do. You need to spend 15, 20 minutes reading with your kid, but your kid doesn't have homework. You do.
Yeah. And I think there's so much there that is so true. And I don't even get me on homework. Oh Lord, please don't get me on homework, because I can tell you, you know what, we are training our children from a very early age that they have to bury themselves in their work, and I disagree with it so much. My son, he's in honors classes and in middle school. Who even knew? I didn't even know they existed. I was never in an honor class, and I'm
My
like, this.
granddaughter is too.
I was about ready to pull him out because it just became too much. Like, it's just too much. Just the whole idea of homework drives me crazy. It's this whole idea that we have to work nonstop in order to show our worth. But at the end of the day, right? What do you want to leave educators with, right? Based off of your experience, which is a wealth of experience that you somehow tried to squeeze into 80 pages. I don't know how you did it, because I'm sure you could have written 1,000 pages off of all that you've learned over these couple years. But what do you want to leave educators with right now today as we conclude the podcast?
I'm glad you asked that, because I was having a conversation with our principal earlier this school year. I told our superintendent about something that was happening in the building, and for the life of me, I don't remember what it was. And it wasn't important, but it was important at the time. But when he said, "Thank you for sharing that," I said, "If not us, then who?" And that's kind of been my mantra for this school year. If we're not going to be the ones, then who is? Who is going to be the ones that engages the families, that builds the relationship with those kids, that builds the relationships with those families? If not us, then who? It has to be us. And that's my platform this year.
It's it.
If
And
not
it only
us, then
takes,
who?
right. And Jim Sporleader says it only takes one, right? Just takes one.
Just takes
and if
one.
we all decide that we're going to be that one, then imagine how we can continue to move forward. So
Right.
You all, for fun, I put in if you are listening live, I put in a link to my favorite family engagement promo video performance that I did as a principal. I don't know if you all know, but I used to have some dance moves, and I have tracksuits to prove it. So if you're listening live, click on the link under any of the social media. If you're listening to the podcast, go to our social media, Trauma Informed Educators Network on Facebook or LinkedIn or on, my brain just X, and amongst many others, and checked out the link. But speaking of connection and social media, Kris, if people want to find you, where do they find you? Where can they get your book? All that good stuff.
The book is on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com. There. Whoops. There we go. I am on Facebook. I think it says Kristen Jenkins, Kris, at pre-K33 on Twitter. I'm not going to ever call it X because I think it's stupid. And just said Instagram at pre-K.Kris. And I think I'm Kris Jenkins on, I don't know, I might be Kris, I might be Kristen on LinkedIn.
There you go. So make sure you follow her, get those links down. James Moffitt says, prove that I can dance. I will prove that to you, James Moffitt, at the ATN conference, the Attachment Trauma Network conference, which is February, oh man, my brain just quit, 19th to the 21st, I think. Could be the 18th to the 20th. It is in Dallas.
That's right.
It's in Dallas, right? So yeah. So, hey, James, I'll prove that to you in Texas. And if you guys are going to the ATN conference, come hit us up in a booth. We're actually going to have a highlighted time where you can get your Unapologetic Disruptor t-shirts at a very high discount. And actually, I'm making new ones that say Unapologetic Disruptor, and down here it's going to say for good. So that when people see them, they're like, tell me about that. You can be like, hey, I'm unapologetically disrupting for good. Because at the end of the day, we've got to change some of these systems because they're just not working for everyone. So if you go to the ATN, the Attachment Trauma Network Conference in February, come by our booth. I'm going to have stickers. We're going to have t-shirts. And then come listen to our highlighted time. I think that's on Sunday, if I can recall. And just come and chat. I love connecting to people who listen to the podcast, who are part of the network, all of that good stuff. So we hope to see you all there. And wow, I told you this would go by so fast.
Yes, you did.
Next guest is actually going to be Ginger Healy. She wrote a book recently, and she's going to be at the ATN as well. That's going to be next Monday. So come back here next Monday and hear from Ginger and I. And as always, please, 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 please go out into the world and do something absolutely awesome. All right. Thank you all everybody that was here live with us. Amanda, James, Dustin, Morella, Jonathan, all of you that came tonight and were chiming in and being a part of our conversation. Much appreciated to you all. And for those of you who come back nearly every time we have a podcast, and for the record, I'm only doing them about twice a month. I want to keep a consistency with also not burning myself out. So I am trying to live by the messages that I preach. So, but next week, Ginger will be here. I know she was on about a year ago and we had an absolute blast. And so I know we will have a blast next Monday as she tells us about her new book as well. So, Kris, thanks for being here. Those of you who are live, thanks for being here. And I will see you all next week. Kris, if you hold on for just 1 second, and I'll see you all later.